Hey guys, it is a stunning autumn day, my favorite season of all time, and I'm wearing two sweaters today, so like that makes me even happier. Sitting underneath a beautiful red maple. I'm in Pennsylvania right now, just convalescing from a surgery, but I wanted to go into and talk about the article that I wrote last night around a major transit that we're experiencing in 2025. It's been a while since I've posted just because I needed to really do the work around this surgery, but believe it or not, the surgery is the physical, spiritual work that needed to happen in congruence with this transit. And so I'm walking this walk with you, and I'll explore more in the video. So last night I wrote a Substack. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend that you read it before you listen to this video. But it's about Neptune's retrograde into Pisces. Now, Neptune has been in Pisces for 14 years, since 2011. And what it did a great job of is lulling us into a false sense of safety and security in the relationships that we were in. You know, I call it almost like Vaseline being smeared on the lens. You know, it was a time where we were dreamy. You know, there's nothing wrong with being intuitive as that archetype, but it really didn't force us to look at the things around us in an authentic way. And Aries, on the other hand, is the opposite, complete energetically. And as Neptune went, you know, kind of waffled between Pisces into Aries, then went back into Pisces again just recently on October 22nd, when it did the first direct into Aries transit in April, we saw all of our relationships make a massive shift, okay? And I did a video about this back in April as well. But if you remember, when Neptune went into Aries the first time, I think it was like March 30th, all of our relationships just changed. It's almost like you realized that you were in a marriage that you didn't want to be in. Your partner didn't kind of match up to your spiritual journey and where you're at. Just because you're, you know, with a nice person didn't mean they were your person. A lot of people, you know, had a lot of upheaval in their personal relationships. Their friendships didn't match energy anymore. And then mostly like their families were just like, the toxic behavior was just nonstop. And it was time for them to call a verbal boundary or draw a line, you know, with their relationships with family members that were just gnarly. What Aries did a great job with was to yank off the rose-colored glasses and to force us to look at the things that we are basically joking about with ourselves. It was like the stuff that we refused to see for real and for what it was. It forced us to take a strong look at it. Now, if you did the work around that time and you made the adjustments in your life, that is fantastic, and I'm so happy for you. But here's the deal. Neptune's going back into Pisces one last time before it transits into Aries in January. It's not enough that you just left that relationship, okay? It's not enough that you just walked away from those friendships, and it's not enough that you called verbal boundaries with your family. What you need to do during this retrograde is ask yourself, well, why were you there in the first place? You know, why weren't boundaries held with your family before? Why were you with this partner for so long if they weren't for you? What was it about yourself that you were holding yourself back by? You know, was it conditioning from your upbringing? Was it a narrative that you still identified with, you know, as a person? Did you not see yourself as enough? Were you afraid to leave that connection? Were you afraid to walk away from those friendships? This current transit and retrograde back into Pisces started October 22nd, and it's there until like early November, and then moves fully into Aries at the end of January. This is the time that you do the work to seal that work shut. It's not enough that you gave the verbal boundary or left the person. You need to understand why you were there. That does all of the smaller picture work. Now, the last time that Neptune was in Aries was 1861. It's been 165 years. And if you read my Substack, there's some bigger picture work that also needs to happen, because if you read it, you're gonna be like, dude, what the fuck, Krista? Like, this is a lot of work that you're asking us to do. You want me to let go of all of my baggage from my ancestral lineage? Yeah, I am, actually. And I wouldn't be asking you that if I wasn't doing it myself as well. And I'll give you a pretty solid example of what I'm doing to step into that energy. But I'm going to read from my notes for a second. During this time, as Neptune goes back into Pisces for the last look at all of the illusions and how we are tricking ourselves into being lower vibrational and being in lower vibrational connections, this time washes away the stories and illusions that have shaped 165 years of generations. This is the closing of chapters that our ancestors were born into, and that is the key. I've got all my little notes here. That's the key. Ancestral patterns are given back to source. You disinherit yourself from carrying trauma that doesn't belong to you. No more patterns, no more loops. Whatever trauma you identified with is now dissolved by Pisces. And I will say this, not everything has to be healed, but it does have to be given back. This is where I'm doing the work with this. And I want you to really read the Substack, because I give you some really great first steps to take towards this ancestral lineage healing. You cannot carry it around with you anymore, and you cannot allow it to define you anymore. And I'm saying this in a way of toxic patterns and behaviors only, okay? So for myself, back in December of last year, I found out that I had pretty substantial uterine fibroids. And admittedly, I hadn't gone to a gynecologist in almost 4 or 5 years before that, because, you know, I think it was like right when COVID hit. It was 2019, and I had just moved to New York City, and they shut the city down for 2 years pretty much. And right when gynecologists and doctors' offices were opening, my brother passed away in January of 2021. I can't even tell you the spiral of events that happened that year. And if you know me, you know my story. So it's like I walked away from a lot that year. I was not looking into my health. I was saddled with grief. And then I dealt with that grief for the next couple years. And by the time that I had the wherewithal to put myself back together in 2024, I started following up on all of my doctor's office, visits. And the ER visit, landed me solidly with the realization that I'm carrying around massive fibroids on the outside of my uterus. And so I spent the last year in a lot of rage and a lot of discomfort. I don't care about putting on weight part, but my energy levels were off. Like everything about me felt off, and I felt that I just wasn't in my body anymore. And any kind of disassociation that I did as a woman in the first place, I won't even go into the whole issue of how capitalism puts us outside of our bodies as women because we're supposed to be sexual objects for men. But I haven't been in my body and felt her and paid attention to her in such a long time. When I did some spiritual work around my womb space, and I worked with practitioners around Asheville who I trusted, I finally realized, and I got the message from my ancestors with like, dude, these aren't yours. These are not your fibroids. And I'm like, well, I'll be damned if they're not hanging off of my uterus. I'm like, I'm so uncomfortable. What the fuck is going on? And the women in my family slowly stepped forward. There were 4 ancestors that stepped forward in these healing sessions. And they're like, these traumas belong to us, and you're carrying them for us. And this was in line with a lot of the stuff I was starting to kind of study about epigenetics and how the body keeps the score and how we hold on to our trauma. I didn't realize that everything in my womb was a manifestation of the women who came before me. So going back to, I want you to pay attention to, this Neptune transit is 165 years old. I realized that I was carrying that much of trauma from women in my family who were forced to be in marriages they didn't want to be in. They were forced to give away power and autonomy that they wanted. They were forced to stay in marriages that were unhealthy, to be with partners that were horrible, and they were forced to carry babies that they did not want and they could not care for. And so that constant rolling of helplessness and that narrative of being controlled in the container of marriage and mothership or motherhood was all wrapped up in this huge fucking package in my womb. And so before I had the surgery, I did some ritual, and I actually worked with Artemis. I kind of I worked with Artemis to release that rage and the anger and the helplessness that I felt from my ancestors. And I said, thank you for teaching me this lesson and showing me your experience, but I can't bring it with me. With everything that's happening in the world and the role that I need to fulfill moving into this revolutionary time that we are about to have, just a whole other video, I can't take this trauma with me. You have to have it back. And so I thanked them for their experience, and I gave it back to them. And that's the kind of work that I'm talking about, is that you don't have to heal it, but you have to give it back. And that's where that work begins. Now, I also kind of added into that package all the rage that I feel around organized religion as well, because I was indoctrinated into a church that forced me to worship a male god. I still have a lot of rage around that, but I'm actually not going to sit in that rage anymore. I'm going to use it to help people fight for their rights to have a freedom of religion. So it's more so of how do I transmute that rage that I'm feeling? How do I give that energy back to my ancestors so that I can move forward and be proactive in my own life and my own healing journey? And that's the walk that I'm walking right now. It's a pretty fucking intense one. I can't tell you how, after my surgery, which was a pretty extensive one, I felt so relieved. My energy is back. I feel clear. I'm full of ideas, which isn't anything new, but it's more so of I know what my purpose is now moving forward because I let go of all that stuff that didn't belong to me. And that's what my challenge is to you, is to take this time. It's literally the next couple months. Do the work around it and do the small picture and try to do the big picture work. I guarantee you it feels so good and clean on the other side. All right. With that, another long video. You know that we all know that I'm not short-winded, I'm long-winded. But enjoy this beautiful weather out there. Like, go out, see some trees, take a deep breath, go for an autumn walk, like buy a pumpkin, do whatever it is, like do your witchy ass thing. But enjoy this time, insert play, but remember there's work to be done, because what's coming up in January and what starts in January and is a very long transit, we need you.